about your day for a moment. Every time you open an app, search online, maybe even just walk past a security camera,
Mhm.
you're creating this kind of digital trace. Your preferences, location, what you buy, it all adds up.
Yeah, it's everywhere.
And that data, your data, is constantly flowing, often totally unseen, right, through countless systems. But have you ever really stopped to wonder, how is all this actually being protected?
It's a huge question.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Today, we're diving deep into this, fascinating but complex world of data protection and privacy laws.
Yep.
We've sifted through a whole stack of sources, trying to pull out the foundational principles, the real-world stuff,
How?
stripping away the jargon.
Right. And our mission for this deep dive really is to pull out the most important nuggets for you. We want to help you understand not just what these laws are,
Yeah.
but why they matter so much for your digital life. And importantly, how they're constantly changing, evolving all around the world. We'll look at the safeguards, sure, but also the challenges, the real difficulties in protecting sensitive info when everything's so connected.
So let's start right there. Why do we even need these laws? Sometimes it feels like, just more red tape.
It can feel that way, but what we found diving into these sources is they're absolutely crucial. It's not just bureaucracy.
Right.
They're there to safeguard your individual privacy, first
Yeah.
off, to stop misuse, like, unauthorized access or those spam calls that drive everyone crazy.
Tell me about it.
And fundamentally, they're about empowering you with control over your own data. Plus, it fosters trust between you and organizations, and it even helps sort of harmonize things globally.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense. So whether it's a big national ID system or just like my favorite shopping app,
Yeah.
there has to be a legal framework.
Exactly. Non-negotiable.
So what are the core principles then? The things most laws seem to kind of agree on?
Yeah, good question. Our sources point to several core principles that pop up again and again, often lining up with international standards. First is purpose limitation.
Purpose limitation. Okay.
Sounds simple, right?
Okay.
Data should only be collected and used for the reasons they tell you about up front, or if you explicitly consent.
Explicitly.
Yeah, and the real bite here is how it challenges that collect everything just in case mindset. It forces companies to be really precise.
Gotcha. No hoarding data.
Precisely. Then there's proportionality and minimization. Collect only the minimum necessary data for the job.
Minimum necessary.
Right. It fights against what's called function creep, where data collected for purpose A slowly gets used for purpose B, C, and D without you knowing.
Okay. I can see how that happens.
Then, lawfulness. Collection has to have a solid legal basis. Maybe it's your consent, maybe a contract, maybe a legal requirement.
So it can't just be random.
No. And balancing individual rights with, say, public interest, that's where it gets complex. We also need fairness and transparency. You should know what's happening with your info, plain and simple, openly processed,
Makes sense.
and accuracy. Super important. Data needs to be accurate, up to date, and fixed quickly if it's wrong.
Right.
Storage limitations, too. Don't keep it longer than needed for the stated purpose.
Okay. Get rid of it eventually.
Exactly. And interestingly, there's a growing focus on privacy-enhancing technologies, PTs.
PTs,
Think tokenization. It swaps your sensitive data for random, non-sensitive stuff. Makes it much harder to misuse if there's a breach.
oh, clever.
Yeah. And finally, accountability. You need independent oversight bodies, and you, the data subject, need ways to monitor what's going on.
Wow. Okay, that's quite a list. So bringing it back to us, the people whose data this is, what does all that mean in practical terms? What are our core rights here?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It means you have real enforceable rights.
Okay.
The right to know your data was obtained legally for a specific reason they told you about, that it won't be used for shady surveillance or profiling without authorization. And crucially, the ability to see what data they have on you and correct it if it's wrong.
So I can actually ask to see it and fix it.
Absolutely.
Right.
And if things go wrong, if your rights are violated, there have to be clear ways for you to seek redress to get it sorted.
It's really interesting how these ideas have solidified, especially with the internet booming. And the big one everyone mentions is GDPR in Europe.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
GDPR, it landed in 2018 and boom, became this global benchmark.
Yeah.
Now, it didn't invent these principles out of thin air. It built on older ideas like the OECD privacy principles.
Right. It wasn't totally new.
No, but its Article 5 really hammered down those core ideas we just talked about. Lawful, fair, transparent processing. specific purposes, data minimization, accuracy, storage limits, security. It really forced organizations globally to step up their game.
And, while some bits of GDPR get debated endlessly,
Yeah.
the core principles themselves, as you said, aren't really new or just European. We see them popping up in laws all over.
Exactly right. Because they just make sense. Look beyond GDPR, you see similar thinking, maybe with local twists. Take India's data protection bill.
Okay, what's happening there?
Well, it's proposing stuff like data localization, keeping a copy of personal data inside India. Big emphasis on explicit consent, limits on sending data overseas, plus rights like access and the right to be forgotten.
Interesting. Data localization, huh?
Yeah. Then you hop over to the U.S., look at the California Consumer Privacy Act, CCPA. Different approach again.
How so?
It's not quite as strict as GDPR on getting consent before collecting data in most cases, but it does demand clear notice about what data categories they collect and why. And companies have to keep their online privacy policies updated regularly.
So common goals, but different paths to get there.
You got it.
Hmm.
Shows the global conversation happening, but also the distinct national priorities.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting for me. You've got all these different laws, different nuances. How do they actually enforce this? How do they make sure companies comply and our data stays safe? What are the actual mechanisms?
Great question. That brings us to institutional oversight.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just rules on paper.
Right.
Data protection is usually overseen by an independent body, a supervisory authority, a regulator.
Yeah.
Call it what you will.
Independent being the key word.
Absolutely key. And the sources stress genuine independence. You measure it by how members are appointed, what powers they have, resources, freedom from outside pressure, political or corporate. GDPR's Recital 117 actually talks about this.
Okay. Can you give some examples?
Sure. Look at Estonia's Data Protection Inspectorate, founded way back in '99. Protects your right to public info, privacy and data use, accessing your own data.
Long history there.
Or the UK's Information Commissioner's Office, the ICO. An independent official monitors, investigates, enforces the laws. South Africa has an information regulator. The Philippines has a National Privacy Commission.
So these bodies are quite common then?
Very common. And they typically have powers like monitoring, investigating complaints, issuing fines or orders, promoting public awareness, advising government. They're meant to be the watchdog.
The watchdog. Okay. But even with a watchdog, things can go wrong. Data breaches happen.
Right.
What about security itself? What happens when data isn't secure?
Yeah, that takes us straight to data security. It's absolutely fundamental. Personal info has to be stored and processed securely, protected against, unauthorized access, theft, loss, damage.
Especially things like digital ID systems, right? Big
yeah.
targets.
Huge targets. So legal frameworks usually mandate specific security measures. The sources point to several common ones.
Like what? Encryption.
Encryption, definitely. Also, anonymization, pseudonymization, ways to make the data less identifiable.
Okay.
Also ensuring confidentiality, integrity, meaning the data isn't tampered with, and the ability to restore systems quickly if something happens. Regular testing of security is often required, too.
And what if a breach does happen?
Then data breach notification kicks in. This is a big one in international standards. Organizations usually have a duty to tell the authorities, and often you, the individual, if there's a significant breach.
How quickly?
Varies. GDPR says within 72 hours to the authority and the individuals without undue delay if there's a high risk to them.
72 hours isn't long.
It's not.
Yeah.
Most U.S. states have breach notification laws, too. South Africa's regulator gets notified. It's becoming standard practice. And of course, there are usually penalties, sometimes criminal ones, for unauthorized access or messing with data, especially in critical systems like ID databases.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly. What about sharing data, between different companies or government agencies? Can be super convenient, but feels risky too.
It is risky. Linking information across databases, especially, really ramps up the privacy concerns. Legal frameworks try to set clear rules about when and why data can be shared, both by government and private companies.
What are the supposed benefits?
Well, the upsides are potentially big. Convenience, better services, maybe seamless transfers if you move, better risk management for companies, cost savings, more efficiency for government.
Okay, I see the appeal.
But the downside is real. If it's not carefully controlled, sharing between government agencies, for instance, can become a kind of backdoor.
Backdoor.
Yeah, a way to get around privacy rules that apply to collecting data directly. Think about huge population databases with biometrics, like DNA. Very tempting for law enforcement, right?
Definitely.
So policymakers, courts, they wrestle with this balance. One approach is just applying existing rules, like search and seizure laws.
Yeah.
Maybe you need a warrant to access certain shared data.
So treating it like searching someone's house almost.
Kinda, yeah. You see examples like the EU's police directive. It says data collected for one reason can only be used for crime fighting if there's specific legal authorization and it's necessary and proportionate.
The tight controls.
Supposedly. India's Aadhaar Act is interesting too. It allows sharing some info with a court order. But even core biometrics can potentially be disclosed for national security under very strict government oversight. It's a real balancing act. Australia's Privacy Act generally needs consent for sharing for a new purpose, but has exceptions for law enforcement, though they have to document it.
Accountability again.
Exactly.
And what about when data leaves the country entirely? Our info flies across borders all the time, often without us thinking about it. How's that managed?
That's cross-border data transfers. And securing those was actually a huge motivation for getting international agreement on data protection principles way back, like with the OECD framework.
Ah, okay.
Many countries restrict sending data abroad because they're worried about the standards, or lack thereof, in the destination country.
So they can just block it.
They often permit it only if the other country is deemed to provide adequate protection. Basically, if the rules are roughly equivalent.
Adequate. Who decides that?
Usually the government or the data protection authority in the sending country. The EU's GDPR is famously strict on this. Transfers outside the European Economic Area are limited unless the receiving country has an adequacy decision.
Like Japan, you mentioned.
Right, Japan has one, Canada, Switzerland, a few others. The UK is seeking one post-Brexit. If there's no adequacy decision, transfers can still happen, but you need appropriate safeguards.
Safeguards like?
Things like legally binding agreements between public bodies or standard contractual clauses. SCCs, these are pre-approved contract templates, or binding corporate rules, BCRs, for transfers within a multinational group, or maybe approved codes of conduct.
So legal hoops to jump through.
Basically, yes. And then you have things like the U.S. Data Privacy Framework, EPF. It's a specific mechanism allowing transfers to U.S. companies that self-certify. They meet certain principles like notice, choice, security, access, etc.
Okay, so complex, but there are mechanisms.
There are mechanisms. It's a constantly evolving area, though.
So it feels like ultimately a lot of this comes back to us, the individual, our consent, our control. How central is that in these frameworks?
It's incredibly central. User consent is widely accepted as a primary legal basis for processing data, unless there's another specific justification.
Not a legal obligation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But for consent to be meaningful, you need clear, transparent information beforehand. What data, why, how it will be used. No hidden clauses in tiny print, ideally.
Right. But what about government stuff, like getting an ID? I don't really consent to that. I just have to do it.
Good point. In cases like mandatory ID systems, legal authority often replaces consent as the basis. But even then, transparency is crucial. Clear explanations through privacy policies, public awareness campaigns. People need to understand why the data is needed and how it's protected.
Makes sense.
And for particularly sensitive data, GDPR specifically calls out things like biometric data. The standard is often explicit consent, a higher bar needing a very clear affirmative action from you.
Explicit consent. Okay.
But individual rights go beyond just consent. Many frameworks guarantee your right to access your data, review it, correct it, rectification, and even request its erasure, the famous right to be forgotten.
The right to be forgotten. That sounds powerful.
It can be. Think about, I don't know, genetic material from an old medical test you no longer want stored, or maybe a previous married name you don't want floating around.
Yeah, okay.
These rights need to be backed up by clear procedures, how do you actually make the request, and technical measures to make it happen. Some laws even guarantee data portability.
Portability, like moving my phone number.
Similar idea, but for your personal data. The right to easily get your data from one service provider and move it to another. It fights lock-in and potentially lets you use your ID system data, for example, in new ways with different apps or services.
Okay, that's potentially huge for competition and user control.
It really is.
So we've covered a massive amount of ground here. Principles, specific rules, rights. For organizations trying to navigate all this, and maybe even for us trying to understand it, what are the common threads? What does building a really solid privacy framework actually involve?
Yeah. Looking across all these different regulations, you see common denominators emerge that actually help organizations build a coherent approach.
Well,
It boils down to those core data protection principles we started with: transparency, purpose limitation, minimization, accuracy, storage limits, security.
Right, the foundation.
Then ensuring strong individual rights, access, correction, erasure, portability, having robust security measures, technical, organizational, clear consent requirements when consent is the basis, and really importantly, accountability and governance, documenting everything, records, risk assessments, audits.
So for a company, this isn't just abstract, it means practical steps.
They're absolutely practical and starts with data inventory and mapping. You literally have to figure out what data do we have, where is it, how does it flow through our systems. You can't protect what you don't know you have.
Makes sense. Map it out.
Then, meticulously assessing cross-border transfers. Knowing where data is going, understanding the rules in each place, putting those safeguards like SCCs or BCRs in place, and telling people about it.
Okay.
And doing impact assessments, especially for high-risk activities. Vetting your vendors, who are you sharing data with, what are their security practices, making sure contracts are tight, covering responsibilities, security, what happens in a breach.
That sounds like a lot of work.
It is, and
Yeah.
crucially, it requires a collaborative approach. It's not just the legal team's problem.
Ah,
You need cybersecurity, privacy pros, legal, data management, IT executives, even the board, all working together. Data governance isn't a project. It's an ongoing effort baked into the business, ensuring data is available, reliable, accurate, high quality. Our sources consistently flag cyber attacks and data privacy failures as top risks for businesses today. So getting this right isn't optional, it's essential.
wow. What a deep dive indeed. We've gone from those core principles through global regulations like GDPR and others, looked at oversight bodies, security needs, the tricky issues of sharing and cross-border flow, right down to your individual rights and control.
It's a complex web, definitely, but all interconnected,
Absolutely. It really connects to every single digital step you take.
which I think raises a really important question as we look ahead.
Yeah.
With privacy rules expanding so fast and technology like AI advancing at lightning speed,
Mhm.
what's next? What new kinds of data protection, what new forms of individual control might we see emerge? And maybe more fundamentally, how will society adapt to this constantly shifting digital landscape?
That's a big question to ponder.
It is.
So for everyone listening, your digital footprint, it's constantly growing. Understanding these laws, these ideas, it isn't just for lawyers or big companies. It's really about empowering you, helping you navigate your own digital life with hopefully a bit more awareness, more confidence. Keep asking questions, keep learning, and keep protecting your digital self.